Grace Darling was an ordinary girl who lived an ordinary life in an ordinary way. That is what made her special. With a night housekeeper for a father on the outer farms, her youth was like living in a sandcastle. Storms, tides, seaboards and crevices which boiled on her doorstep with countless adventures. Grace is gone now. All that remain are the memories. Yet her name will live forever. This is her story.
Okay, now you remember how the tune goes. It goes like this. And the words, "'Twas on the Longstone Lighthouse." Let's have a try. 1, 2.
On the Longstone Lighthouse
There dwelt an English maid, pure as the air around her, of danger ne'er afraid. One morning, just at daybreak, a storm-tossed wreck she spied. And though to try seemed madness, I'll save the crew, she cried.
Grace was born into a family of lightkeepers with the light as their common responsibility. William Darling and his family stood faithful guard over the high seas in a domain where their purpose, their existence, was the maintenance of the light. By 1838, that domain had moved from the Brownsman to the Longstone Light, and it was on this outermost island, a wild and desolate outcrop, that at the age of 22, Grace's life was about to change forever. A new style of vessel was invading the shipping lanes, steam. Goods could now be transported at remarkable speeds. At 9 knots, they were no longer dependent on the weather or the sea. On the 5th of September, 1838, the luxury steamer Forfarshire sailed from Hull, bound for Dundee. It was the height of the Scottish season. With 60 passengers and crew and a cargo of fine cloth and hardware, she was the hallmark of sophistication. Built of wooden planking on an iron frame and powered by 2 90-horsepower engines, the Forfarshire had set off with its marble mantelpieces, Bolin silver, gilded trays and cushioned sofas to meet the worst storm in living memory on one of the bleakest and most dangerous coasts it could possibly have chosen. By 8 p.m. the Forfarshire had found herself off Berwick, with the wind back more northeast and rising to gale force. Under normal circumstances, all would be well, for she was famed for her speed and dependability. But conditions were not normal. Her starboard boiler was leaking. As the night wore on, so did the violence of the storm. Both deck and engine pumps could not contain the water from the boilers as it poured into the bilges with every roll. The situation was becoming hopeless. By midnight, the wind had veered due north. William Darling was alone with his daughter and his wife, and they were about to face the highest tide he had known. He turned to Grace for help. Everything must be made firm and brought into the kitchen. There was not a moment to lose. At 1 a.m., the Forfarshire's engine stopped completely. The wind was blowing out to leeward, and she refused the guidance of her helm. She was doomed. She struck Big Harker at 4 a.m. and immediately broke in two. Within a few horrifying moments, ladies and children, tourists, merchants, equipment, cargo, and crew had vanished into the depths of eternity, just 400 yards from the Longstone and safety. 40 minutes later, Grace Darling spotted the wreck. William Darling knew that it was absolutely impossible to take the Cowbell out into the full force of the gale on a direct course to the wreck. The only possible chance was to let her drift with the wind southward to the Blue Caps and bring her up under the lee of those rocks and the Harker Reef. But returning would mean rowing against the tide, let alone the gale. It took 3 men to manage her in rough weather. On that early September morning, the weather was more than rough. It was vicious. Yet there was one possibility. If the survivors were alive and had strength enough to row. Grace grasped the idea eagerly. If he didn't accompany her, she'd go alone. But he needed no persuading. With that, Grace Darling stepped into her position in history.
'Twas on the Longstone lighthouse that welcome English maid, pure as the air around her, of danger ne'er afraid. One morning just at daybreak, a storm of wreck she spied, and lo, to Christ's madness, how they the crew she cried. And she pulled away over the rolling sea, over the waters blue. Help, help, she could hear the cry of the shipwrecked crew. But Grace had an English heart, and the raging storm she braved. She pulled away with the dashing spray, and the crew she saved. They to the rock were clinging, a crew of 9 all told. Between them and the lighthouse, the street-like mountain rolled. Said Grace, come help me, Father, we'll launch that boat, said she. The father cried, 'tis madness to face that raging sea. One murmured prayer and God us, and then they were afloat. Between them and destruction, the planks of that frail boat. Then spoke the maiden's father, return or do not weep. But up spoke brave Grace Darling, alone I'll brave the sea. And she pulled away o'er the rolling sea, over the waters blue. Help, help, she could hear the cry of the shipwrecked crew. But Grace had an English heart, and the raging storm she braved. She pulled away with the dashing spray, and the crew she saved. They bravely rode the billows and reached the rock at length. They saved the storm-tossed sailors, in heaven alone their strength. Go tell the wide world over what English blood can do, and sing of brave Grace Darling, who knows we saved the crew. And she pulled away o'er the rolling sea, over the waters blue. Help, help, she could hear
To the end of her life, Grace would never see her action as heroic. Time and again, she explained she was simply doing her duty. Unable to come to terms with the gifts and the accolades, Grace politely withdrew from the center of attention. Grace Darling embodied all the qualities that we most admire in a person. Her courage was as unique as her motive. There was no hope of reward, no promptings of achievement. Grace freely offered her life for people she had never seen before or would ever see again. 4 years later, she developed a cough. At first, the symptoms were not alarming, but the cough persisted. It was tuberculosis. On the 20th of October, 1842, at 8:15 in the evening, Grace Darling died in her father's arms. To celebrate the 150th anniversary of Grace Darling's heroic rescue, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, in conjunction with British Gas, has launched the Grace Darling Appeal to all schools in the United Kingdom. Grace Darling was 22 years old when she rowed with her father in an open boat to help people she did not know and whom she was unlikely to see again. In Grace Darling's day, they had no radio communication, no radar, no weather forecasts, and no depth sounders. Yet one thing remains in common: the sea. It was the same then as it is today. The dangers haven't changed at all, nor has the sacrifice. Grace Darling's heroic act was the embodiment of all we believe in today. She and her famous deed have passed into legend, reminding us always of the need for an efficient and well-equipped lifeboat service around Britain's coast. In recognition of Grace's selfless act of courage, the RNLI and British Gas have launched the Grace Darling Appeal. The aim is to raise enough money to provide a new lifeboat for North Sunderland, the nearest station to the scene of the rescue. It will be called